This is Journey of an Aesthete podcast. I am your host, MitchHampton, and I am so delighted and honored both to have one of the preeminent Shakespeare scholars, and as he mentioned to me before we at the outset, both performance, so the acting of the bard, as well as analysis, theory, literary criticism, both. And so it's very rare, that it seems to me rather rare that somebody does both. Somebody could talk about FrankKermode and Marjorie Garber on one hand, on the other hand, talk about different performances of Shakespeare and talk about Paul Scofield's King Lear, which blew me away when I saw that when I was a child. So I don't know where to begin. This is Dr. Kurt Daw, and you are here to talk not only, of course, about Shakespeare, but also to put in a good word for our producer, Laurie Strickland, who is the reason you're here, because she contacted you and said you must be on the show, that we would have a good conversation. And so we want to thank her, of course, up front, too.
We certainly do. Laurie was one of my first students. I
wow.
just retired after teaching for 40 years.
Wow.
And Laurie was in one of the early classes, a sort of extraordinary class that taught me a lot about being a teacher. And that's a thing you sort of learn over a long career, is that sometimes when you think you're providing the opportunity, you're actually getting a growth opportunity of your own. But Laurie's a she's a person and a great artist.
Well, I can tell you, she's enormously helpful to this show and helpful to me. I mean, she has many skills in many areas. But we're going to talk about, there's so much to discuss, of course. I mean, part of me wants to sort of have a general discussion of the different uses of Shakespeare in different eras, right? Because right now, of course, it's Chloe, it's the filmmaker Hamnet and her vision, and the Irish novelist, their vision of Shakespeare, which is, of course, it's interesting to compare that to Shakespeare Love, Tom Stoppard, and different, but not to get too long-winded on it, but Shakespeare, I guess, just to put it in probably a crude, kind of not so Shakespearean way, Shakespeare is the cat, as Lord Buckley would have said. Shakespeare is the person that really, his preeminence is precisely that is this, cliche as it sounds, eternal, and speaks to so damn many people, so many eras.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that later, but I don't want to ignore your personal biography because it's so important. It's so unusual. So let's start with, I'll ask you when you first encountered the bard. Whatever age or whatever place, and then I'll share some about how I first encountered, and then you could talk more about how you came to be the scholar you are and all the rest of it. So thank you.
I'd love that. So I'm sort of an unusual candidate to become a Shakespeare scholar. I was raised in rural Idaho, in a town that had a smaller population than the current apartment building that I live in, and not a lot of cultural opportunities. But I was lucky. My maternal grandmother was a librarian and a school teacher, and a Shakespearean of sorts, as much as women were allowed to have professions in those days. And she sort of got me started with a love of books and a love of reading. And from that, in the school library, I discovered the Folger editions that that made the things accessible to me that wouldn't be otherwise.
Hold that thought. I remember those editions, and from the 1970s. That would have been my, early to mid 70s. I encountered those. My dad talked about them. So these were, for those who don't know, what are these editions? Not to get too
well. They're lovely little paperbacks with the Shakespeare text on one page, and on the facing page notes that explain it as you go along,
Wow.
and wonderful
Yeah.
illustrations
Oh yeah, I remember those.
that come out of the Folgers collection of early modern books.
What? So Folgers was part of the book publishing, presenting, you know, fine literature, if you want to call it, to the masses in a way. And it's so what years was this?
It's
Yeah,
the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C.
that's
that
right.
does these. And
What years? What years? What's very important to me, because you're talking about Idaho and a farm. Now, my girlfriend grew up in a town with like 120 people in it.
she beats me then. We had 427 in my town.
Yeah, right. But I just made me think of that, a really small town. So, what years would that have been when you were?
I was in high school from 1970 to 1974.
Wow. And so, is there anything, while we're on the subject of that town, is there anything you've already talked about, that there was interest in learning in that town, even though its population is small, it's a rural environment, you know, your parents are librarian and books, there was a love there of books. Is there anything else you want to say about Idaho at that time that's significant to you, or anything that comes to your mind, or what it's like living in a town like that at that time, or anything that, you know, you want to?
You know, I loved my hometown.
Okay.
But there was not a lot of space there, and I needed to grow up, and I needed to go elsewhere.
Uh-huh.
I needed to discover a life in the arts.
Okay.
And I was very, very fortunate to have an extraordinary, well, I had an extraordinary series of teachers, but I had a high school drama teacher who got me and believed in me. And like so many people, my key to a bigger and more exciting life came because of an educator who lit a fire in me.
You were already in productions in high school, is that correct? I mean, what were
I was not Shakespeare, but
may I ask what productions you did?
Oh yes, I started where everyone starts, in OurTown.
OurTown. I was going to guess Inherit the Wind or Old Man and the on Borrowed Time, or also.
OurTown is a junior, and I played Tom in the Glass Menagerie when I was a senior in high school.
And not to get sidetracked too much, but Thornton Wilder, it's been a dream of mine to do a whole episode on OurTown. He was a genius. Again, we're back to
when we go there, I hope you'll invite me to be part of a panel.
Absolutely.
I firmly believe that Thornton Wilder was the great playwright of the first half of the 20th century.
Easily.
And I still think OurTown is the most beautiful, I would say the most misunderstood play.
It's a lot. So it's a lot in that sense. Thornton Wilder and Robert Frost are a lot alike. They're artists that are incredibly deep and profound, but because both are so accessible, maybe. But that's also in both their greatness. I don't know why I thought of Robert Frost, but there's a little bit of a. But Thornton Wilder is underrated. Skin of Our Teeth and Met in.
It's interesting because I'm working on an article right now about how Thornton Wilder used some techniques that a lot of people call Brechtian, but are in fact Shakespearean. And what that connection is, and how, especially the way in which he steps outside the play to comment on the play.
Do that. Well, that's one of the many. Of course, I don't want to, in calling Thornton Wilder like Robert Frost accessible. That you have to unpack. There's a lot.
It's weird that we live in a time that thinks of that as a possible insult, right?
Well, there's that, of course, because some of the greatest things are accessible. Not always, but sometimes. Of course, there's that. And of course, Shakespeare, who we inaugurated this discussion, is in many respects one of the most accessible of writers in the English language, which is also why, as we said, he's done over and over and speaks to the millennials and speak to 20-somethings in this new film. That's one of the things I love about this new film. It's kind of doing things.
I completely agree with you that I think the biggest thing that has happened in my 40-year career
Mhm.
is a steady advancement of in opening Shakespeare up to more audiences and more resonances.
Yeah.
And of course, Hamnet, this wonderful new film,
Really.
is a product of feminist Shakespeare, trying
That-
to think through a playwright who lived in a time that was deeply misogynistic,
Oh yeah.
and yet managed to write in a way that still speaks around that, speaks to that.
Mhm.
And I think feminist scholars have helped us understand and see Shakespeare in a new way in my lifetime.
Yeah, that's right.
Um,
I mean, the scholar I've read, of course, is Marjorie Garber. Of course, I mean, she's a
one of the
giant.
great,
Yeah, and would you say that she fits into a little bit what you're talking about?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Marjorie Garber was one of the first great feminist voices to be
Yeah.
taken seriously about Shakespeare scholarship,
Yeah.
and really shook things up and continues to shake things up.
Oh yeah.
I mean, every book she writes. I mean,
Mhm.
Shakespeare, after all, is a
It's
is a
great.
wonderful book.
So if I had a canon of books, that would be on it. I would Shakespeare, after all, would have to be on it. In some respects, I'm not trying to be. In some respects, more than Invention of the Human. In some respects, maybe more. Even as much as
I think so.
yeah.
I like HaroldBloom, and I liked him particularly in his time, but I think almost that everything that has happened since HaroldBloom's time has been about pushing the edges further than he pushed them.
But there's also, I think that she's in. I just really love that book, and that book is a real. Again, there's a lot there. The other book that I encountered that really fascinated me was FrankKermode.
Yeah,
FrankKermode, Shakespeare's Language, and it's a small book. I mean, whether it's not as famous as some of these other ones, but I think that we want to come back to the issue of language, because he puts language front and center. And Shakespeare, what would you say to an audience? Shakespeare is so deeply linguistic, and it's language, and the English language, and what he does with it. And what comes to your mind when you think about doing things with words that he does, do characters and what does that mean exactly to you, or what is it?
Well, in theater history, I talk to my students a lot about how in Shakespeare's period, there was a real belief in the power of words and the power of language, in the power of rhetoric, the ability to make a verbal argument in order
it's part of rhetoric. Yeah, no,
And though I love modern drama in its own way, Chekhov is the other pole to which, but he's an opposite in that he wrote about people who were inarticulate, who didn't always know what they want and couldn't always express it even when they knew it.
That's true. That's true.
And there's a kind of beauty and tragedy in that. But the interesting thing, I think, about Shakespeare is that it was written and designed to be communicative, using rhetorical patterns that still work. What we sometimes get hung up on the fact that the language is old, over 400 years now.
It is
but I always tell my students that Shakespeare isn't really hard because he's old. Shakespeare's hard because he's hard. He's hard because he's willing to make.
He is hard. But again, as I said earlier, he's also so deeply accessible and so communicates to everybody. And it's an interesting.
Yes, well, I mean that in the sense that he was willing to talk about very deep topics. Using every ounce of power that language has to cover them, and he just trusted his audience that they could follow along. That being rhetorical was not seen as tricky or deceptive. It was actually seen as trying to make an effective argument.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that you're in touch with something going on now. As you know, there's a lot of I would say Philistine is what I would call it, but kind of sort of Philistine attitude towards words, towards things like rhetoric.
Yeah.
Actually, people not really knowing what rhetoric was. So you're imagine it's a 101 English, and you're here to show people that rhetoric is just a part of our living, breathing, and part of truth, and not. What would you say to dispel that?
Well, I would say that a Shakespearean era schoolboy went to school almost exclusively to learn how to make verbal arguments. That's almost all they studied.
Yeah.
They studied the great masters of that from Greek and Roman literature. But their whole point was that that communication is the key to connection.
Yeah.
That we have to communicate our ideas effectively and succinctly in order. It's the only way we can know other people.
That's true. That is true. Yeah.
That
raises, of course, profound philosophic questions about the only. So when we say the only way to know other people, because none of us are fully mind readers.
That's right. That's right.
And none of us are fully clairvoyant. We get just glimmers and partial, and we're often wrong about other people, as you know. The latest science shows us how wrong we can often be. But we do have this mediation.
Not to mention the latest politics.
Well, sure. But that only tells us how deeply necessary a mediation is. Language, in other words, that's what makes it all the more important.
Yeah,
that's why we have rhetoric. Is kind of what I think what you're saying. If I take the
it was certainly an Elizabethan idea.
That's interesting.
That you wanted to get on the public stage when there wasn't such a thing as social media or media at all. Virtually the only places that you could expand your ideas out to a public were the pulpit and the stage.
That's right.
And both of those were deeply involved with language and rhetoric to make those arguments to make a kind of commonality.
That's right.
And so when I'm teaching Shakespeare, performance, I'm always trying to talk to my students about it as joining the conversation. There's a big social conversation that's been going on for a couple thousand years. The biggest hit on Broadway at the moment is a 2,500-year-old play. And we want to insert ourselves into that conversation.
Absolutely.
And a way to do that, I think, is to gain some mastery over the person that we think of as central to the conversation. The English language hallmark of cultural capital is Shakespeare.
That's true. That's true.
So for a kid like me, coming from a farm from Idaho.
Oh yeah. Let me ask you, something about that, because it's interesting. So now, before we started recording, I confessed each other. I admitted to you that I was so privileged to have seen Meryl Streep and John Cazale in Measure for Measure in 1976.
And I am so jealous.
Right, but. Putting aside the star power of those, also what they meant to each other in their personal life as a couple, and Joseph Papp and what he did bringing Shakespeare to people. When I mentioned those two actors, what do you imagine, or what do you think they would have? How would you describe where they fit into performing Shakespeare? What do you imagine Meryl Streep and John Cazale, given where they came from and who they study with? What do you think that would be, or what do you imagine? You say you're jealous. What is, as an example, what do you see them in Shakespeare? Or how are they? How is their Shakespeare different or similar to a Paul Scofield Shakespeare or a Al Pacino or whoever? I don't know. Anybody.
Well, that Measure for Measure was absolutely of its moment. That Measure for Measure was in Shakespeare's time a comedy.
Yeah.
And people weren't yet ready to take seriously the content of that play. I mean, I was taught in college in a Shakespeare class that it's a story about a frigid woman. You know that in the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
Isabella, the heroine of Measure for Measure, for people who don't know this, a novice nun who gets propositioned by someone who has life or death power over her brother.
That's true.
And she declines to sleep with him.
Oh, yeah.
She says, my soul is worth
more
the same as my brother's soul.
Yeah.
And I was taught a reading of that was that a psychosexual reading of that was about Isabella's lack of openness to the world in the way that sexually mature people would be. Meryl Streep made us think about an actual woman in an actual situation, because she is so powerfully real as an actress. And the relationship to John Cazale's was not just stage real, it was real.
Oh, yes, that's why. Yeah, it's amazing.
And at that moment, that play became a different play. We have reread it ever since.
It's interesting.
Their performance, and understand it in a completely different way. And one of the ways that we understand that is that it is a play about Isabella. She is the protagonist. A thought that until you got somebody of Meryl Streep's, I mean, it's not really her star power. She was already a star, but not the kind of star she is now.
No, that's true.
It's her skill that made that completely remade our ability to imagine heroines as protagonists of Shakespeare plays in an age that wasn't ready yet to think of anything except sort of British-centric male privilege.
Right.
You know, how amazing that she did that. But there is no character in Shakespeare who is more rhetorically powerful than Isabella.
Speaking of rhetoric, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because she makes all of these arguments about, you need to forgive my brother, you need to be merciful, you need to look past. And I mean, she speaks very, very, very powerfully to Angelo's deepest soul, but of course that's why Angelo, the corrupt ruler who propositions her. But of course, that's what he finds exciting about her, right?
Right. Of course, the very thing,
intellectual power exceeds his.
Right. The very thing, it's a problem for him, right? That the thing he finds most exciting is what is resulting in a no to him.
Exactly right. I mean, he has that wonderful line, when I think and pray, I pray and think to several subjects, to separate subjects. That the thing that is so sexually exciting to him,
right,
it turns out to be her intellect and her devotion, her love for her brother, her love for her religion, her love for her God, and her ability to express all of those things, even though they're the exact opposite of what he wants to hear.
Wow, yeah.
He,
And this is really important while we're on the subject of acting and performance. What was the first Shakespeare you were in as an actor? What play was it, and when, and where?
I was in The Winter's Tale.
Oh, wow.
And I got the part because I went to college as an agriculture major. And from my little town where I raised sheep.
Yeah, sheep.
And the theater department, The Winter's Tale, has a scene that takes place in a festival, and the theater department was doing a production, an outdoor production that was going to use real sheep, and I could trim a sheep by hand.
And you did that.
I did that. I got the part because I knew how to run hand shears.
Is there not to get on that topic? Is there something in Shakespeare that is earthbound that way, and what we call rural, and involving animals? That's a dimension of Shakespeare, isn't it?
Sure. When you come to Shakespeare from a small rural environment, you realize that Shakespeare grew up in a rural environment. Huh. He's constantly talking about flowers and herbs and birds and sounds and animals. As You Like It has the famous observation by the character that the rural character, when the upper class characters meet this rural character, he says, well, I know how to be polite, but I don't want to shake your hand because I've been handling sheep and my hands are greasy. I mean, that's the kind of that's right. Extraordinary detail that you think, oh yeah, he grew up handling sheep, or he wouldn't know that you get the lanolin on your hands. And it's all over Shakespeare, which is, but the miraculous thing is that I know people who were born and raised in very aristocratic environments in England, and they say, what's so remarkable about him is he was so familiar with the customs of the time and with the, I mean, all of us feel like Shakespeare was our next door neighbor growing up, right? Yeah. That's the thing about the richness of Shakespeare that makes it, as you say, accessible. And as I think of it when I'm thinking about my audiences, as exciting and relatable.
Well, you were in Winter's Tale in a rural environment, being the sheep, herding sheep, and in the play, and for real, and also in the play. Talk a little bit about the journey from that to further plays and teaching and scholarship. What unfolded with that over those years? Of what
I was mostly self-taught. I mean, I took a Shakespeare class. I took 2 Shakespeare classes in college. I took a literature class and I took a performance class.
Okay.
I went to graduate school at a professional theater training program, Southern Methodist. Studied a little more there. But I would say that I mostly drove this agenda myself until the early 1990s, when by the grace of God, I got accepted into a National Endowment for the Humanities year-long workshop at the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington.
Oh, the very thing we were just discussing. Did you feel you were coming full circle?
Not so much full circle as that I just finally got to my dream location. I got to go there. Wow. But I certainly thought, oh, this is Mecca. This is sure. And it was a year-long workshop about Shakespeare and performance. Another 16 scholars from all over the United States. We flew in once a month to Washington, D.C. for a long weekend, studying a specific Shakespeare play every time.
Wow.
Then we would go see a live performance of it somewhere in Washington, D.C., often the Shakespeare Theater, in a great company there. Um, we'd start workshops at 8 o'clock in the morning on Friday morning, see a play Friday night. By 8 o'clock the next morning, we all had to have a full review of the play that we'd seen the night before, written and turned in.
You had to do that. Oh my God.
Studied again all day Saturday and on Sunday morning, and then we all flew home Sunday evenings. The Shakespeare, the Folgers education department is extraordinary. They are still extraordinary. They are still one of the chief resources in the United States. And they literally changed my life, my career. At the end of that year, I wrote a book about acting in Shakespeare. I had previously written a book about acting, essentially about acting using Stanislavski technique, but explaining with modern scientific terms what.
Wow.
But at the end of that year, I wrote a book about acting in Shakespeare, and shortly thereafter, a second volume about all the scenes and monologues and things you can extract from Shakespeare's plays and their equivalents in other plays of the period. And I've been writing about Shakespeare ever since.
Yeah. If I had to ask you, hold that thought. If I had to ask you to name two things you had to turn in, you had to turn these things in, right?
Yeah.
Name one or two things that really stands out to you now, that something you had to turn in, and that turning that in did something to you in about Shakespeare. Just anything that comes to your mind.
Yes. So I saw Tom Holtz play Hamlet at Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C. An absolutely extraordinary performance. And he made, I focused my review around one specific moment because it struck me so highly, that when he first encountered the ghost, the scene, he did the most extraordinary thing, I thought. He fell to his knees and started, during this long scene where the ghost is exhorting him to revenge, he just kept crawling across the stage he was going to touch that ghost. And the power and the suspense of that, I mean, it was absolutely riveting, and absolutely extraordinary a performance by this guy that we at that point knew as Mozart, as Amadeus, and I thought maybe in a way that we sometimes often mistake an actor's roles for the actor, I thought he was kind of a silly and frivolous actor. And then I saw him play Hamlet and thought, I mean, this is one of the most extraordinary intellects I've ever seen at work on stage.
Do you want to go into the weeds and talk about our response to Milos Forman's picture? Because I think we might have a little different view of his before. I mean, because we have to talk about who Mozart was to do that, of course.
Yeah. So my wife is an opera singer, or now retired, and I spent some of my early career also directing in the opera house.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, I mean, I thought the film, my reaction was that the film was itself quite an accomplishment, quite a beautiful film.
Oh, sure.
And quite a wonderful realization of the stage play, which I had also seen.
Yeah, I saw that in New York. I saw that. I forget who was it? Was it Jacob? Who is it? Was it Len Curry? Who would play? Is that Len Curry? One of those, Jacoby or one of those. I don't remember who. It'll come to us.
Sorry, I'm blocking on the name. I can see him.
It'll come to us in the middle of the night.
Yes, it will.
That was quite a production. Peter Schaefer. I mean, biggest Peter Schaefer.
Yeah, but in its own kind of Shakespearean way, it isn't very accurate history. It's about a different subject matter.
That's true. It is.
And I think I assumed incorrectly that the roles in it had been typecast, because film tends to rely on types.
That's true.
And I didn't fully understand until later what I thought Holtz was actually doing in that.
What do you think he was doing? See, when I saw it, I saw both the play and the movie like yourself, and I have to say, and I'm a musician, I wasn't really offended by his performance the way some were, and I didn't even necessarily I didn't really think it was I believed it. In other words, I sort of felt there was some accuracy there, and because I know that in the world of music, so people can be the most accomplished, gifted musicians, but they also could be sort of like they could be a little burlesque and kind of, over the top. And also it's sort of imagining Mozart as the rock star, as the vain, superficial, and sort of it's a little bit of Ken Russell. Heaven forbid, don't sue me. It's not, I'm not saying it's like Ken Russell, but it's so reimagining. But that, of course, opens up the question of reimagining famous or venerated icons like an Einstein or a Shakespeare or Mozart. That there's something there, right?
There absolutely is, and I have to say that it 40 years later, I think about it a lot differently than I did, because I think I put Mozart in the same, at that still, in the same category that I think Shakespeare often gets put in now, still, that because they're at the pinnacle in a certain way, we quit imagining them as human beings. And I freely admit that when I first came to Amadeus, I wasn't thinking about Mozart the human. And over time, I've come to believe more and more exactly what Schaffer's point was, that those things could coexist.
Yeah, that's true.
That he could be that level of genius, and that level of genius still might have been silly and even juvenile. At certain times. I will. It makes me think about our original subject, though, that I think what's happened a lot in my lifetime of Shakespeare scholarship is we've spent more and more time rethinking Shakespeare as a more human, less the greatest writer that ever lived.
Right.
Even if it's true that he was, the point is, if that gets in the way of our thinking, there's a real person in there who had flaws, and I think he was extraordinarily visionary for his time, and yet still think some things that were limiting. I think it has helped to rethink Shakespeare in a way that is more about his humanity and the possibility that these works are open to more levels of interpretation than just asserting genius.
The standard, as was the case in Measure for Me. We talked about Measure for Measure, but all the plays probably. But what is your talk? I want to talk a little bit more, because it's the hit of our moment, Hamnet, and it's what it says about historicity or pandemic and grief, right? Black Plague, pandemic, disease, and loss of loved one. That's, of course, that's put in a simple way. But what do you think of what it does with those topics?
Well, I think that it was such an accomplishment as a book that Shakespeare's not even named. That inside the book they managed to get through without ever saying out loud. And I thought it was a way of our understanding again that
Mm.
Shakespeare is a touchstone, but not the whole story.
Right.
It's Anne's humanity that
Oh yeah.
is centered and grounded there.
Oh yeah.
And even if I mean it's mostly about things that we can't know. It's just an imagining, right?
Oh yeah. I don't want to.
Incidents.
We'll put obviously. I guess I should have said. So I mean, it's not the truth or age, but there is a truth of pandemic at that. So there is historical.
Yeah.
And there's also truth of,
It's not the truth.
Right.
But it certainly is true.
Oh, yeah.
And it's true about our experience coming out of the pandemic and understanding in reverse how much that affects things. Again, I was always taught back in the day that Shakespeare wrote 4 great tragedies.
Okay.
And Romeo and Juliet was not one of them, because Romeo and Juliet relied on a completely ridiculous coincidence in the end that the message doesn't get to Romeo that Juliet is faking her death because the friar bringing him this message gets locked up, sequestered because of plague.
Oh yeah, there it is again.
And that was seen as an unbelievable coincidence, drug in from far left field. And all of a sudden in 2020, Romeo and Juliet was a plague play. It was completely new and relevant. And in that moment, it seemed not a ridiculous a plot complication, but an absolutely predictable and necessary one. And I thought, Shakespeare wrote during the plague years.
Do you think Romeo and Juliet's an underrated play?
I do.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I do think it's an underrated play, and I think it's still highly rated, but I still think people don't understand the depths that play reaches, and some of the extraordinary beauty of it. But I think the way in which it often is most underrated is just thinking that it's an immature play and his dramaturgy got better.
Yeah, all that. They call it minor, all that crap that they say.
Yeah, but
it's
okay.
Well, it's but what are some of the ways that people get Romeo and Juliet wrong? You think? I mean, what are things that people haven't considered in it?
Well, the biggest way, I think, is the absolute insistence that it's a play about a perfect and transcendent love that fixes everything in the end. It's like, well, it doesn't. They die, and the message of the play isn't it cool when teenagers fall in love and kill themselves? The message of the play is that older people in a society completely betrayed the young people, and the enormous destruction across the boards that caused. And again, I think it's a play of the moment, because we are back in a time that I read politically as being willing to sacrifice a younger generation for an older generation's greed. And
of course, the sacrifice. Actually, it's so bad. It's a sacrifice of that older. It's suicidal for that older generation. So it's sacrifice above everybody. But that's
yes, yeah. But I think about this especially about ecological readings right now. Shakespeare, where really we may have already sold an entire generation down the drain, with damage that may not be fixable, or certainly not easily fixable. And the power of art to speak to concerns that I don't think political rhetoric has helped us get to an understanding of what a dangerous moment ecologically we are in. But I think art keeps helping us get it, keeps helping us get there. And I mean, what can I say? After a life in the arts, I think my life essentially is informed almost completely by art. But I've come to believe that so is our world. You know, so.
So do you agree with Jeanette Winterson when she says that, you know, we need poetry? Like she says that it's only the most privileged, ne'er-do-well people that say we don't need poetry, that poetry is, you know, that's, you know, we need poetry gives us what she says, the strong language. We need strong language.
You know, yes, I absolutely agree with that. But again, a little callback here, but I'm thinking about Thornton Wilder saying in OurTown, you know, Emily asking, does anyone ever understand the world every moment? And the stage manager in this wonderful moment says, no, poets and saints, maybe.
That's right.
You know, and I think, yeah, that's who gets it. Poets are the people who get it. And he understood his role as an artist to try to deliver this message about, you know, that art is the way that we apprehend our world.
Reality.
Yeah.
Art is the reality principle, interestingly enough.
That's right.
So what do you think? I was going around and around whether to bring this up because it's a big topic, but it's an important topic, and I think it. What would you say to our audience or listeners when say Bloom talks about self-overhearing? Do you think that Shakespeare really is innovative in charting something in human consciousness itself? That was real. Is that really new? You think at least in the sense that, and if it is, what does that entail? What do you think that is? This monologue or I don't know. I don't want to speak for it, but
yeah, I have to say that I'm a little skeptical of Bloom's argument that Shakespeare invented our humanity, our understanding of our own humanity, because I also am a scholar of ancient Greek drama, where I think these things are also present into an sort of But I think that he is correct in the sense that this essentially is what being an artist is. And the greater the artist, the greater the degree that they get it and further it. And I have to say that I discovered my own humanity primarily through the theater and ultimately primarily through Shakespeare. Because my world was of a certain size.
That's right.
Until I encountered these kind of cultural records that made it bigger. There are people who were raised in New York, at the center of culture, or London or Paris, and I think maybe encountered many of those things firsthand at an early age. But for the vast majority of us, I feel like I'm kind of a regular story about somebody who was raised way out in the sticks and a long way away from all of that. And it's only because art captured it and preserved it, and that it became available to me. And boy, am I grateful, because it's a really different life when your life is informed by the perceptions of and the love of art.
Is there another Shakespeare play you feel moved to just mention that you performed in after Winter's Tale? Another, just one or two, just you want to say this?
Well, the focus of my scholarship is Midsummer Night's Dream.
Oh, okay.
And I've worked on Midsummer Night's Dream for 20 years.
Hmm.
I built an online electronic version of it
Oh,
specifically for performers.
yeah.
And I've been writing a lot about it recently. I have an article in the Arden Shakespeare's recent volume about the state of this play, the sort of current scholarship on this play. But I am,
So I imagine you know the JamesCagney, the film.
of course.
Yeah, I mean, but people that haven't seen it, tell what do they should they?
Well, and what a lovely piece it is. But interestingly, there are lots of great midsummers captured on film. I'm a big fan of the recent Nicholas Heitner production from London, from the Bridge Theatre,
Okay.
which I thought significantly reimagined this play. But I guess that word "imagine" is on my mind, because this is the ultimate subject matter of Midsummer Night's Dream, is the power of human imagination, and the redeeming power of art. These silly artisans, workmen, trying to put on a play with almost no knowledge of theater or even understanding of basic theater conventions, that eventually, in the end, produce this unbelievably moving and beautiful moment, where I mean, turns out even they can't mess up Pyramus and Thisbe, which is a Romeo and Juliet stand-in, right? That it's so powerful and moving in the end. That, I mean, this play, it gets me every time. I've seen it. I've seen literally hundreds of productions.
Oh,
If it's in viewing distance, I go see productions of Midsummer Night's Dream. I love this play.
yeah.
I love all the variations in it. But the thing I love most about it is that it keeps calling us to a life of imagination.
But when you say too that it's a play that's ecological and there's nature and nature.
Yes, green readings of this play are all the rage at this moment, because the supernatural figures, which I think we have to read as allegories, not, I mean, I don't think this is a play about actual supernatural fairies hanging around in our world. It's meaningful because they're interesting allegories, but they're causing the ecological crisis of their time. Nature is out of harmony because these figures of imagination are at war with each other. Yeah, it's really interesting what the scholars who work over in the field of ecology are bringing to Shakespeare right now, but also what scholars of identity are bringing to it, what of racial identities and sexual orientations, and a whole realm, feminist scholars. I mean, this play keeps being reread and refreshed, because in some way is so fantastical that there is no correct reality to attach it to. There's only a calling for how do you imagine it in a way that makes it make sense. And oh man, it moves me every time. I find it alternately hysterically funny and beautifully moving. It always calls to me.
Is there, I'm thinking about you teach now and you have taught. If I had to ask you, think about three instances of students you've had where they start with Shakespeare. They start in one place of Shakespeare that we could say is okay, maybe, or is fine for it, but then something happens in them. because of a play, and they change in some way. They've either expressed that in a work that they did. I don't know. Is that too? I don't know if that question makes any sense. But
it's a great question. I mean, this is what education is, right? I mean, I central to my identity is this idea that I'm a teacher. The thing that I teach is Shakespeare, literature, and performance, and especially the relationship between them. But what I do, my identity is as a teacher. And I will say, overwhelmingly, when students come to me, when I first encounter them, their feeling about Shakespeare is they understand that he's great, but he's not for them. They have no ownership of Shakespeare. This is possibly because I tend to teach at enormously diverse universities. I teach at San Francisco State University right now, one of the most diverse schools in the United States, and a school that sort of specializes in helping social and economic mobility.
So would you say that, to be clear, so you say it's a cursory view because they feel that Shakespeare is only for British people of a certain era, or that kind of thing?
Or rich, highly connected, highly educated people. I mean, because they don't know the reality of what Shakespeare was like in his own time. What they know is that people who've studied Shakespeare have Ivy League degrees. Nothing wrong with Ivy League degrees; they're great. But not everybody has one.
Not everybody can have one or one.
But they think they're the wrong gender, they're the wrong ethnicity, they're the wrong sexual orientation, they're the wrong social class. Almost all of my students think that they are not right for Shakespeare when they start.
And
then they start, and then they find that speaks exactly to me. That's exactly my thing. That's exactly my moment. That's we can find ourselves in Shakespeare, even in interesting ways. I mean, there's a scholar right now, Carla Delegata, who I greatly admire, who speaks about Latinx Shakespeare's. And one of the things that she says is that there is not a single Latinx character in Shakespeare at all. And still, you can do Latinx Shakespeare because you can own it, because you can bring it to you. She helps students who think there's no character that speaks to me here in my primary identity, and yet it's a vehicle which I can speak to my identity through. I mean, this happens with it's not because I'm a miraculous teacher. It's because it's a miraculous subject matter that almost all of my students eventually find themselves in Shakespeare and start thinking, oh yeah, I own that. That's I mean, that's
why you do it. That's what
that's what I do it for.
Right.
And what I always say to my students is, this has enabled a wonderful life for me, and it will enable a wonderful life for you. This is what, not necessarily in a strict vocational sense. Some of my students have gone on to become actors, but
not all
of them. But one can live a life in the arts in a lot of ways, but a life of the mind, it's rewarding. It's sort of what we're all about, and it's why I do what I do. Because I don't live on a ranch in Idaho anymore.
Although you did once, so
yeah.
Part of me suspects you bring that ranch with you. At least
I do. I value it very much.
Yeah.
But I also love that I live in San Francisco,
Oh,
that
yeah.
I'm part of a very vibrant, sophisticated culture where I can go to the opera one night, I can go see a Shakespeare play the next night.
The opera in San Francisco is something.
Yeah, it is. It's gorgeous.
What do moves you at the even good things like this episode have to conclude or come whatever you want to say it? Is there anything you want to say about it? It can be about Shakespeare or anything else that you feel moved to say at this moment, or
well, you know, it is sort of about Shakespeare, but I think it's about the bigger point that I'm in this moment where I've just retired after 40 years of teaching.
Amazing.
And I think about what an extraordinarily lucky life I've had to be able to live this path, but how much it gives, how generous the world has been to me. And I think about this. So the message that I have is that I have remarkably few students whose parents think it is a good idea for them to study the arts or go into the arts. I faced this in my own department. In the middle of my career for 10 years, I was a dean of the arts at 2 different universities where I had students in not just my discipline of theater, but dance, music.
That's a lot of work, my goodness.
Visual arts. It is.
Yeah.
But again, it's good work, right? It's
me.
But in all of those times and places, I find most parents are terrified when their children say they want to go into the arts. What kind of life will you have? And I think, oh my goodness, what a wonderful life I've had. And I think clear back to my college days where a lot of my classmates took options that their parents wanted them to take because they were super, super safe, that turned out to be professions that don't even exist anymore. Things that turned out not only to not be safe, but literally dead-end careers. But a life of the mind, a liberal arts, and particularly the arts, I think is an inexhaustible resource. And if I had one message, it's if you're considering doing it, do it. And if somebody close to you is considering doing it, encourage them. Get on their team. It's a good decision.
Kurt Dahl, this has been really a real treat, and it's also your generosity in sharing the most important things like these and Shakespeare on our podcast is I'm greatly appreciative.
Well, and I want to thank you for inviting me. I love being here.
And we will send this out far and wide.
I appreciate it very much.
Happy New Year too.
Thank you. Bye.